Welcome back, Inflation Nation. The nation is reeling from increases in costs from food and clothing all the way to the gas you pay at the pump, all contributing to the increases in the cost of living for many Americans and another interest rate hike from the Fed. All of this comes as the global economy stands on the heels of a recession. We'll talk about what this means for our economy and our country, what it means for you, and the politics of all this. Plus, I'll sit down with State Senate candidate Maria Peterson to talk about those stories and more. Today, June 17th, 2022. From Ishan Media, this is the Ishan S. Show, a podcast about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics, all from the perspective of the youth. With me, your host, Ishan. Welcome back to the Ishan S. Show. Thank you so much for joining us here today. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get talking. If you didn't hear last week, this season of the Ishan S. Show, Season 2, is coming to a close. The season finale will be coming out on Tuesday, June 28th, so stay tuned for a statement on that. I'm so excited to also share my sit-down with Maria Peterson, who's running for state senate here in Illinois. We talked about inflation, the imminent Roe v. Wade decision, gun laws, and more. That'll be later in the episode. Stay tuned. But first, let's take a look at some of this week's top stories. Americans in 5 states headed to the polls on Tuesday to vote in primaries. And while there weren't any major races in any of these states, many people in Republican politics were paying close attention to the Republican primaries in South Carolina's 1st and 7th congressional districts. Now, we covered this on the Political News blog, but the people who represent these districts, Nancy Mace and Tom Rice, respectively, in the 1st and 7th, they are members of the House, and they are Republicans who aren't the biggest fans of Donald Trump. To make a long story short, they rebuked the former president after the January 6th riots and faced a lot of backlash from their party. In fact, I think Representative Tom Rice was one of 10 Republicans in the House to vote to impeach President Trump for the January 6th riots. Nancy Mace did not. However, she also did say that Trump held some responsibility for the riots. But regardless, Trump endorsed both of their primary opponents as retaliation. And if you've listened to this show, you know what the Trump endorsement means. It's a powerful weapon in Republican primaries now. So many people thought that their candidacies were essentially over. But that night, it ended with Nancy Mace winning her primary, beating the Trump-endorsed candidate Katie Arrington. However, Tom Rice wasn't as lucky. Russell Fry is a state House rep in South Carolina. He beat Tom Rice. On Truth Social, President Trump's social media platform, later that evening, he congratulated Mace on her victory in the primary and now supports her. Those were some of the races of that night. For more information on these two people, Nancy Mace and Tom Rice, and these races specifically, check it out, the latest blog post on the IshanSshow.com. Okay, and the House January 6th Committee. They always make their way into these headlines. They held 2 more hearings this week. The one on Monday aimed to highlight how President Trump was not listening to his campaign advisors who were telling him that he had lost the 2020 election. And it tried to highlight just how many people in the Trump inner circle and in the West Wing just knew that he did not win. They talked about how the Trump campaign was fundraising with the claim that the money that they were fundraising after the election was going to court battles when no such fund actually existed. And then on Thursday, which is today, we're recording on Thursday, it was postponed from Wednesday due to technical difficulties. But anyway, in today's hearing, we're recording on Thursday, in today's hearing, they talked about the effort from Trump officials and Trump himself to pressure Mike Pence into essentially decertifying the election for Joe Biden. which has a lot of things associated with it. But in the end, it described how some of the behavior, at least the reported behavior of Trump pressuring Mike Pence, could be considered borderline illegal. But the committee has not yet made an official statement on specifically the legality of any of this. But here's my 2 cents on what's going on. The January 6th committee has done at least somewhat of a good job presenting their case in a manner in which the information that we're getting cannot be ignored. It's not like you can just listen to this and go like, yeah, okay, whatever, they said this. This is real information that they are showing us. They are bringing testimony from people who we otherwise would have never thought were against the election fraud claims. And as they've shown so far, there was a good number. But regardless of where you stand on this issue, it's present and clear that they are making at least some progress. Maybe not the best, maybe not what they hope for, and maybe not the most reliable, but they are making at least some inroads in their investigation and the way they're presenting it to the American people. All right, those were some of the major headlines from this week. But let's get into today's top story, which is about the ever-increasing cost of living in this country. Now, I've talked about this on the show before, and actually I've been bringing it up almost every episode dating back to like December. And not even that, I've been following this issue for even longer. The point is that this inflation discussion that we're talking about right now has been going on for a while. Now, for my listeners who don't know exactly what inflation is, Webster's dictionary defines inflation as, quote, a continuing rise in the general price level usually attributed to an increase in the volume of money and credit relative to available goods and services. In more simple terms, what that means is there's a lot of spending money in our economy, but not a lot of product for consumers to buy with that money. Now, generally, there is something like good inflation. And in good inflation, we do see small amounts of this here and there. When you see these tiny increases in prices, it helps businesses. But what we're seeing right now is the supply of products is not as consistent with the amount of money that we have. So right now, our economy is not in flow as it might be when we have good inflation. What we're seeing right now is a culmination of a lot of things, most importantly, COVID. We saw major government spending during that time, which increased the volume of money circulating in our economy, as well as those stimulus checks, which continue to do that, in addition to a multitude of things. As we reopened our economy, that money still remained in circulation, so there was a lot of money to spend. But because we were reopening after taking like a nearly 2-year break, not a lot of the business world was able to bring up with this lag. And so there was not enough product that was available to buy with that money. And then couple that with supply chain issues, which hindered manufacturing and the transportation of goods, and that spells a recipe for bad inflation. Now, of course, I'm not an economist. I look at the politics of things, so this explanation of inflation could be completely off. So if there's anything wrong with this, email contact@theshawnesshow.com or DM the Sean S. Show on Instagram to correct me. I'm always open to the criticism. But anyway, we've been seeing this happen like crazy with all kinds of things, from food all the way to baby formula, where we're seeing a shortage right now. The Consumer Price Index, which is a metric used by the Department of Labor and that is used to measure the cost of living, reported that between May of last year and this year, average consumer prices went up a whopping 8.6%. And that's not just May. It's been like this almost all year with these numbers. That's crazy inflation. And you hear about this everywhere from everyone because inflation right now, it's impacting everybody. And in addition to consumer prices, the price of gas has also been a hot topic that's also been shooting up. Like right now, AAA has the national gas price average at $5. That's huge. And I look at the gas stations where I live, and I see $6 gas. In places like California, they're looking at $8 gas. When you think about it, a year ago, or maybe a little more than a year ago, when we had much cheaper gas and you had like a 20-gallon tank, you weren't spending $120, $160 on gas. You were spending like $60, $80. So that's a huge burden on a lot of families right now with the price of gas going up so crazy. Many say that it's because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where Russia controls a good amount of oil. And yes, that did help contribute to it, but there's a large combination of factors that have happened together to put us in this situation. So when somebody says, oh, it's just the invasion of Ukraine that did this, that's not entirely true. There's a lot of factors, including the fact that we were cutting back on the amount of oil that we were drilling, not tapping as much into our oil reserves, or the fact that oil is a global commodity. So there are global markets that decide the price of oil. So regardless, Russia is not the only reason that we're seeing these changes in our oil prices. There's a huge array of facts that are being put into that help contribute to the situation that we're in right now. And then here's another issue on top of that, the stock market. It's been dropping a lot, and the S&P 500, which is a good metric that shows some of the biggest companies in the stock market. It's basically lost virtually all its gains since Biden took office on January 20th, 2021. The Fed is also now hiking interest rates by 0.75%, which is a lot. And you have to think about where interest rates apply. They apply to things like loans, mortgages, and credit card bills. They apply in a lot of places. So interest rates going up is never good news for anybody, if you are one of those types of people. For other people, it might help, such as if you have money in the bank or whatever. But generally, when you increase interest rates like that, it does not help. It comes at the cost of the economy, and it burdens a lot of people that find themselves in that situation. However, the Fed justified this to say that they are trying to control consumer prices and combat inflation. And so this is the biggest interest rate hike in quite a while. So the theme of the party is "My wallet hurts." When we have not seen these kinds of numbers in nearly 40 years. For some context, that's when President Reagan was in office, when E.T. came out, and USA Today had released its first issue. It's been a long time. And these are bad numbers. I wouldn't want these kinds of numbers if I was in office right now. But President Biden does find himself in that very situation. Biden has been receiving much of the cut for what we're seeing in economic issues right now. And Republicans have been very adamant about pitting the blame on Biden. And while not all of this is his fault, it's an effective campaign tool that is helping out the Republican Party. It's become the Republican Party's best campaign weapon. In fact, on CNN just a few days ago, I was watching one of their statistics guys. They were saying that Republicans have not had a better time going into the midterms in a long time. And the numbers that Biden's seeing right now are not the best. Think about it. We're on the verge of a global recession. What that means is consistent economic decline for several months. Technically, whenever we see such a national issue, it's put on the president. That's why we're seeing Biden receive so much of the blame. And it corresponds with his approval rating, which is at its lowest at 39.8%. A Political Morning Consult poll showed that 41% of voters are concerned with the economy. That's 41% of all voters, with their top issue being the economy. And think about it. There are all kinds of issues that voters care about: abortion, guns, and national security, all kinds of things. So when 41 out of 100 say that the economy is their top issue, that's a huge share of the pie chart. And that's not at all good news for Democrats, who control both the House and the Senate by very narrow margins right now. Their chances at the House look bleak at best. And the Senate I've refrained from saying that it's out of their hands, but now I want to say that it's not as good as it once was. So what does this mean politically? It's what I said. Democrats have a bit of an issue. It's not fair to count them out yet because we still have some time before the midterms. Things can change. But if I return to season 3 and we're still talking about rampant inflation, then perhaps National Democrats' 2022 prospects don't look too good. As for Biden, historically, economic issues have gone both ways for presidents. Bush 43, Bush Jr., and President Reagan saw similar bad economic situations early in their terms, and they got beat pretty bad in the midterms, their first. But then they went on to win a second term. On the contrary, Bush Sr. saw great economic growth at this point in his term, but then went on to lose re-election. Then there's Jimmy Carter, a Democrat who saw a lot of things similar to President Biden on things like foreign policy, gas, inflation, etc. He lost re-election, seeing these types of economic situations. So we'll need to see how President Biden and his team handle this because precedent looks both ways. All right. That was a look at this week's top story about the economy. When we come back from the break, I'll sit down with Maria Peterson, who's running for state senate in Illinois. We'll talk about the economy, education, gun laws, and more. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break. All right, so we're back from the break. Now, as I made clear on the show, voting is very important, and knowing the candidates you are voting for on the ballot is even more important, from school board races all the way to federal offices like U.S. Senate, especially as we see more and more heated issues take center stage as we head into the midterms. Our guest for today's episode is a Democratic candidate here in the great state of Illinois who's running for state senate to represent Illinois' 26th Senate District. We're joined now by Maria Peterson. Thanks for joining us, Maria.
Thank you, Ishan. It's a pleasure to be on the Ishan S Show.
Thanks. Now, before we get into our discussion today, why don't you take a few moments to introduce yourself to my audience?
Oh, well, thank you. I am a North Barrington resident running in the 26th Senate District. I've lived in North Barrington since 1996, and prior to that, my husband and I lived in Chicago in the Galewood community, and we moved to the Barrington area because our 3 boys were getting too big, and there was just too much testosterone in one room. So we looked for a bigger house, more land, less traffic, and a lot of things have changed since then.
Interesting. Now, all right, so let's get into some things. Now, you're very likely to win your primary that we're going to have here on June 28th. And so you're going to be joining various down-ballot Democrats in November. Now, as you're aware, I'm sure this year's top issues include the rising gas prices, inflation, and a slew of social issues. Mm-hmm. And as I've covered here on the show previously, Democrats are not necessarily expected to do as well in this year's midterms on the national level. But how do you think candidates like yourself at the local and state level might do? Would you think it might be a little different for you guys here, or what just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in Illinois, we are in the center of the country. We are the crossroads of the nation. We have an excellent airport, and we have, with O'Hare Airport, we have Midway Airport, we have Pewaukee, and we have Waukegan airports. We are so centrally located. We have awesome expressways and highways. We have water. We have Lake Michigan, so we have fresh water. And because of the Democratic Party, because we are Democrats, we care about people. And we care about people, and we do it through great legislation. We have created laws to protect women's rights to their privacy, to decide how they want to do their lives themselves. We have some of the most protective laws, not 100% perfect, but we have some of the best gun violence protection laws here in the state of Illinois. We have pro-business laws. So many businesses are starting to come into Illinois, both in Lake County, and just last week there was an announcement of how tech is growing in the city of Chicago. So Illinois is a business-friendly state, aside from what you might hear from other people, but the numbers prove it.
Right. But even as you do mention those things, we still do see the cost of living going up right now. So what are some policies or plans that you might try to introduce to help address some of these crises, and if you are elected?
Well, I think first and foremost, the thing I hear at the doors the most, aside from the issue of Roe v. Wade and gun violence, is our real estate taxes. That real estate taxes are so unfair, and I heard that back in 2018 when I ran for the Lake County Board, and no doubt, some people live in one-bedroom homes. They've paid their mortgages, and they are saving money as if they have a mortgage, because they have to make those real estate taxes. And now these are people who are empty nesters, they're elderly, and they feel that they've done their share. And no doubt that our real estate taxes currently is what supports our wonderful educational systems that we have here within the Senate District 26. However, because of that, we have to find a way to take the burden off of the real estate taxes, off of those people that are now empty nesters, that are elderly, and even for young families that a fairly new couple that buy a home or want to buy a home, and they can't buy the home because they can't afford the real estate taxes. We have to find a way to bring income into the state that is not real estate tax dependent, and that goes back to the graduated income tax, which was defeated 2 years ago.
Right.
And it has to be reintroduced, and it has to be done in a way that educates the public, understanding that if a person is making, for example, $1 million, why is that person not paying more tax than the person who's making $45,000 or $50,000 a year?
Now, a big concern for many of my listeners, as we have a high school listenership rate, education is at the top of mind of many of my listeners. And you did mention education just a few moments ago. So it's a hot topic here in the northwest suburbs. How do you hope to address some of the issues like school funding, as you talked about, and curriculums, which are at the top of parents' minds right now in this area?
Well, let's start with funding. Again, if we make our income coming into the general fund in the state of Illinois, if we make it through a graduated income tax, then the funds for school funding should come from the general fund and then deposited directly into the evidence-based funding formula for the schools. So that's with regard to funding. With regard to curriculum, a lot of the rhetoric that has happened since 2016 and then the election of 2020 with that parents don't have a say in their children's education, I find that very difficult to believe. I'm still active in our own Barrington 220 school district with referendums, most recently in Framework 220. And from the time I was a parent with my very first child, who is now 35, we've always had the opportunity of being involved either with the PTO, back to school day, handing out school supplies. So there's always an opportunity to touch base with the school and the curriculum. And also the communication coming from the teacher saying, we're going to be teaching this. We'd like to introduce you to this subject and give you the option to opt out if you don't like it. Okay.
And then I guess bipartisanship kind of does play a role here in terms of education in the state of Illinois. So what kind of education-related policies are you willing to work on with the other side?
Can you be more specific?
With, for example, with things like school funding, which you did mention is an issue, is there any way are there any policy ideas that you think you might be able to work on with Republicans at all?
I think in terms of school funding, we do need to work a little bit more on this evidence-based funding, because the whole concept of that is to make sure that schools across the state get equal education. And that clearly isn't happening. And that's not happening because, again, it's based on right now real estate tax values. So a home here in Lake County or Cook County could be the same size. In fact, I just heard this yesterday. There's a subdivision that crosses over Lake Cook Road. Some of it is in Cook County and part of it is in Lake County. Identical homes. The Lake County side house pays a lot more than the Cook County side. And therefore, if you look at the schools in Lake County in District 26, or that the schools that the kids in District 26 go to, they are so much more superb than the schools on the Cook County side.
That does move me on into my next question, which is about bipartisanship in general. Other than education, what are other policies that you do want to work on with your potential Republican colleagues?
Well, I think there's a lot. I think we all agree that jobs are needed. Mm-hmm. And in order to help create jobs, we need to really tout how awesome our state is, how we have the infrastructure to bring more business in. We have the schools to train people, to educate people, to be ready for those jobs. Aviation is becoming a huge thing. Harper College is doing an aviation program. And with the expansion of our airport at O'Hare, I believe there's a look at Waukegan Airport being expanded or enhanced. There's a lot of potential. And so together, Republicans and Democrats can work together to bring more business. And bringing more business just brings more income into the state, which then helps everyone.
True. Let's shift gears a little. Last month, Politico reported about a draft Supreme Court opinion that would essentially overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade decision that protected abortion in America as a constitutional right. Now, as we come closer and closer to that official decision, I wanted to hear some of your thoughts on the matter.
Well, again, thankfully here in Illinois, we have pretty Loctite legislation that protects a woman's right to privacy and equity. But we do have a lot of neighboring states, Missouri, Indiana, for example, that want to even cut off access for women to cross borders. And that is not an issue the state of Illinois can handle because it's an interstate commerce issue. So we really need our Congress people to work on this, both the House and the Senate, to work on interstate commerce. Because essentially what's happening is that if, for example, the state of Missouri does follow through in banning women to cross the border, you're banning their right to freedom in terms of movement, you're violating interstate commerce, and you're also violating the professionals who want to do their profession, the OBGYNs, the nurses, the clinics.
And so as we see more and more people come out against, as I believe a majority of Americans do not support overturning Roe v. Wade. Mm-hmm. So it is very likely that it is going to happen with the 6-3 majority we have in the court. Is there anything that you could do here in Illinois that might help? That might help other women from other states, even if we are seeing that? Do you think there's stuff that might get done in Congress, things that might get done in Congress at all to?
Unless they codify abortion, which right now with the Senate being 50-50, it's highly unlikely. Yeah. Certainly something that Illinois can explore, but again, we need to do some research. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what state is providing funding to help women out of state come into their state to have access to abortion. I think we need to research it. I don't think we're quite ready yet to jump into that plane.
Right. Okay. Well, yesterday, we here at the Ishana S. Show and other organizations reported that a bipartisan group of 20 U.S. senators, 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats, reached a deal on an outline for gun reform, which would do things such as incentivize states to implement red flag laws, boost mental health care, and reduce gun trafficking, among other things. Do you think this legislation that they just put out yesterday, do you think it goes far enough to address gun violence in the light of the shootings in Uvalde and Buffalo?
Well, we definitely have here in Illinois a gun trafficking problem, with Indiana being so lax in their background checks and the easy accessibility of guns for really children 18 years and younger almost. It's ridiculous. But again, that kind of goes back to the whole interstate commerce issue and conflicts of law. But can we do more here in our state with red flag laws? Yes, we can do more with background checks, dig in a little bit deeper. In fact, when I'm knocking on the doors, I hear people say, I've got concealed weapon. I think no one should have a gun until they're 25. Because as we know, auto insurance companies don't lower rates on auto insurance for young men until they're 25 because their brains are not fully developed. And then also another voter told me that he's happy to have all kinds of background checks because if there's nothing to hide, then what's the big deal with the background check? And if you have to wait one extra day to get your gun, why are you complaining? What's the issue with these? If you're clean and you just want your gun for hunting, or you just want it for that, just in case somebody comes into your home and you're alone, and you go through your background checks and you have your bio safe and you bought it at the right place and so forth, it's registered, you don't have a ghost gun, then most people are good with that.
Now, of course, Illinois is pretty high up on the list of states with gun laws, but do you think there's other work, other than the things that you just mentioned, do you think there's other work that can be done to help address the increase in firearm-related crime rates that we're seeing in cities like Chicago right now?
Yeah, and Illinois has already done a really good job. They included quite a chunk of money in gun violence prevention programs. And a lot of altercations that are occurring in Chicago and even out here in the suburbs is that adults and youths themselves forgot how to deal with altercations. Instead of asking questions, the emotions get high and hot really fast and they pull out a gun. For example, the incident that happened in Oak Brook at Annie's pretzel place happened because two men misunderstood, bumped into each other, cut in front of one another. And it's like, instead of saying, oh, wow, I'm sorry, excuse me, I'll just go to the back of the line, they had an altercation. And again, because of the easy accessibility to guns were pulled out and shooting occurred. And that's a shame.
Republicans have said that these types of laws that we even see here in Illinois are infringing on their rights to owning a firearm. So even as we see those types of beliefs, is there room for bipartisanship on this issue? I've talked to other candidates. Some say yes, some say no. Are you pretty hard set on your views with what you want to get done, or do you think there's some room for compromise?
Well, these aren't my views. This is from what I'm hearing from the voters, that they're okay, if they don't have anything to hide, that they're okay with strong and firm background checks, that they're okay having a biosafe, that they are saying raise the age rate to 25. So these are not my personal views. I don't own a gun. And if this is what the voters who do have guns and who have a concealed weapon license are telling me this, I'm good with that. And furthermore, I just want to say that I have done a number of police ride-alongs, and I've done it for the purpose of understanding what they're going through. And some of the policemen and women clearly say the biggest issue is guns, that they go on a chase, and some of them they have to be ready for when that car stops. They have to be ready because they don't know if that person's going to pull out a gun. And again, for them, it's the easy accessibility of guns in the public that puts their lives in danger.
Okay, well, Maria, we are almost out of time. But before we do end our discussion today, are there any parting thoughts or things that you want to share at all with my audience before we end things here?
I know that this is a young group, and our campaign is growing and thriving, and we'd like to set the example for youth, and so we invite you to help out with our campaign. You can go to info@mariapetersonforsenate.com, and we will get back to you and put you on our campaign team. Thank you so much.
Well, Maria Peterson, running for Illinois State Senate. Maria, thank you so much for joining us here on the Ishan S. Show.
Thank you.
All right. And so that was my sit down with Maria Peterson. We will be back next week. Thanks for joining us today. And so that does it for us here today at the Ishan S. Show. If you liked my commentary, then go ahead and follow at Ishan S. Show on Twitter and at the Ishan S. Show on Instagram for breaking news posts and updates about the show. If you want to learn more about political stories, then check out my political news blog on the IshanSShow.com and enter in your email to subscribe, and just check out the IshanSShow.com. And do us a favor and share this episode and all other Ishan S. Show content with your friends and family. It is the best way for this show to grow and get more people listening to it, and it helps out so much. Thanks again for all your support, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.